In 1805, York was the first African American to come to the West with the Lewis and Clark expedition as William Clark's slave, who eventually was granted his freedom and started a freight company.
When the Rocky Mountain Fur Company was first started, African Americans were making their way to the West in search of jobs as blacksmiths and trappers.
In 1862, the Homestead Act and gold rush in Montana were occurring, and many people made their way north, including African Americans.
When the Emancipation Proclamation was passed, many African Americans headed northwest in search of a better life. The West guaranteed new jobs, full citizenship, and equal opportunity.
When the copper mining industry was beginning to boom, Butte, Montana became the most promising for new freedom and new riches.
As Butte's population began to grow, so did the African American community.
While the Reconstructive period took place, racism was still a very big problem in the U.S., especially in the South. It was still very prevalent in the Northwest as well.
Montana tried to be more subtle about racism by not passing certain segregation laws, such as a proposed law to outline interracial marriage and cohabitation.
Segregated schools in Montana did not work well because it cost the state too much money to keep two schools running.
In 1872, when the segregation of schools law was passed, there were not enough African Americans in Montana to make a law out of it. The schools had to pay $50 for an African American child and $10 for a white child, making segregation too costly for the school system. Since Montana schools were not segregated, it made for a positive experience for everyone to be raised in a diverse community.
In the 1880s, there were 346 African Americans out of the 39,159 total population.
In 1884, Butte, Montana was the largest producer of copper in the world and had more than 300 mines.
A Butte resident, Robert C. Logan, who was a former slave, won a second place in a vocal contest singing in front of 30,000 people.
In 1901, the Bethel Baptist Church was started in Butte. The Afro-American Women's Club, founded in Butte, and soon after and resurfaces in 1918 as the Pearl Club to support U.S. efforts in World War I.
While Marcus Daly was in charge of the Anaconda Mining Company, African Americans were not allowed into the mines. He feared physical harm would come to the colored people, such as African Americans, mulattoes, Asians, or Indians, due to their race, which would cause a loss of production.
The black community was never able to find common ground in the mining industry under Daly, and remained in the service industry and custodial professions within Butte until the 1950s.
Augustus Heinze later formed an elite group of African Americans to be employed underground due to the social progression of Butte society in regards to race.
As time progressed, the African American community was more and more accepted as a part of Butte's economic success, as well as being influential in the political growth of Montana.
As Butte's population began to subside, so did the African American community. At the peak of Butte's population at 100,000 in 1917, the African American population in Butte alone was almost 1,500.
Today, the African American population in Montana is 2,692, which is 0.3% of Montana's population. Although the numbers are much lower today, the African American society contributed to the mining city and will always show its footprints in our history.